So neckline facings. Most commercial patterns for a simple top or a shift dress, anything like that for the upper body, you're going to encounter a neckline facing. And if you put it in perfectly, then it'll be fantastic. If it's got a bit wobbly in the process, then it could break that item you're making. So I'm going to take you through today how to get it absolutely perfect. What I've done is I've cut out what you can imagine is either the top section of a shift dress or the part of a cotton top or even a dress for a little girl. So I've cut the front and back sections of those just as an example, and you could do it like that at home as well. What I've also done is I've cut out the matching facing. So what I've done is created a facing that is exactly the same size as the neckline. Of course, if you have a pattern, you'll cut the facing the same size as the neckline you're cutting. So we're going to go through and begin by joining the shoulder seams. So I have these right sides together. I'm going to place some pins in at the shoulder seams, and in parallel to that I'm also going to pin and stitch my facing. So I've just pinned the shoulders and I'm going to now pin the facing ends together as well. So I'll bring those together at the same time with a nice straight stitch. Now this is where seam allowances come in really important as well. When you're sewing your facing and your neckline, what you want to do is make sure you are sticking to that 1.5 seam allowance all the way through. So my shoulder seams are all finished, and what I'm now going to do is lay them out and make sure they have a lovely press before I move on. I can't stress enough, press as you go along. Never leave it all to the end. You'll have parts that you just can't get to and they'll never quite lie flat if you haven't pressed things as you go along. So the shoulder seams are going to get a lovely press. I'm also going to take the little facing I've created, and that's going to get a lovely press too. So all those seams are nice and open and flat. Once those are pressed, I'm then going to turn my attention to the little facing that we created, because before I attach it, I want to make sure that its outer edge, the one that's going to sit inside the garment, is going to be as neat as it can possibly be as well. Now, if you had an overlocker, you could overlock that quite easily. If you don't have an overlocker, and I know quite a few people don't, but they're getting more popular these days. If you don't have an overlocker, then what you can do is turn a very small amount of the raw edge to the inside of your facing. Press all the way round. So it's about 1/2 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, pressed in all the way round. Set your machine to a zigzag stitch, not too short, so about 3.5 in width, 2.5 in length. And then once you've set that up, just take it under the machine and looking at the right side, facing up towards you, just stitch within that 1/2 centimetre of the edge of the facing. And what you'll end up with is a lovely neat facing ready to be attached to the inside of your neckline. Once that facing has been tidied up around that raw edge that's going to sit inside, you can then bring the neckline and the facing back together again. What you want to do is lay your neckline right sides facing up towards you on the table, then place your facing down onto it with the right side facing downwards. Match the shoulder seams, and if you've used all the same seam allowances all the way through, they should match perfectly. And begin to match first where the shoulder seams are, the centre front and the centre back, and then you can pop a few pins in between if you need to as well. We're going to be sewing all the way around this neckline with our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, just with a normal straight stitch. So my pins are in and I shall get that stitched now. And then there's a little bit more pressing, a little bit of clipping and a little bit of understitching. There's my neckline sewn, and what I now need to do is I shall lay it out, and I'm going to get my iron and I'm going to press just the facing up towards the top of the garment. So I'm going to go all the way around that neckline, pressing the facing upwards to make sure it's ready to turn inside nicely once it's been understitched. Once that's pressed all the way round, what I also want to do is clip the inside edge of my seam allowance. Just little triangles, they don't have to be perfect or especially neat because they won't be seen once this neckline is all turned in. It just means that as the neckline turns in, the fabric in that seam allowance can spread into that beautiful even curve. If you forget to do this, that's when you see necklines starting to push out and not sit nice and flat, or even start to pull and pucker where you've tried to stitch them down or press them into place. So these little notches are really important all the way round before you then push your facing all the way up. And what we're going to do is round the edge of the facing just on the inside of the seam, you're going to pop a line of straight stitch that holds through the seam allowance and the facing but doesn't catch the main part of the top at all. So we're going to run that through the machine now. Very close to the edge, not more than about 1/2 centimetre away, a little less if you can. You want to work really close here and run a line of stitching all the way around that neckline, ready to press it inwards. Start a little way from the edge. You don't want to start right at the very edge because we've got a little bit of neatening to do on the outside edge as well. So start just a little way in from the edge, about 2 or 3 centimetres, 1.5 inches, that's all. And we'll run round that now and see what it looks like when we press it all inwards. My facing's now all nicely understitched, so what we need to do is we need to turn that facing to the inside of our garment and give it a really, really good press all the way round that neckline to make sure that everything is lying nice and flat. Now, being a facing and not a full lining, it will need a little bit of help to stay nice and neatly down inside your garment. So we're going to do a couple of little what's called stab stitches. Now, a stab stitch is where you use a thread that exactly matches the garment you're working on. You take one small stitch through the fabric and then straight back in again, just a couple of threads away from where you came through in the first place. So it's a very, very tiny stitch that goes straight up and then straight down again, hence being called a stab stitch. Now, I would normally put a few of those round a facing like this. Once we've got those stab stitches in place, what we're also going to do is just turn over the back of the facing so that it gives a nice neat edge where the two back lines join. Now, you may have a zip here, you may have a button loop here, you may have a crossover button panel here. You can finish this in all the same way. So the button loop, the zip, or the button panel can all be enclosed into the edge of the facing in this same way. So what we want to do is we want to take the facing, I know we've just pressed it all nicely to the inside, but at the back, centre back there, we want to flip it back out again and press it down just with our fingers along the line of the centre back seam. Now, earlier we said we weren't going to do our understitching within about 3 centimetres of the edge of that back seam. So this is why, so that we can flip this back over again, stitch it just at the same seam allowance all the way up, So once we've sewn at 1.5 centimetres in from the edge, we're going to flip it back over and turn it through, making a lovely square corner at the back there, and then again a really, really good press after we've stitched it. Okay, always press as you go along, can't stress that enough. So our little neckline is finished now. We have it sitting nicely all the way round this little top. It's understitched and it's been stab stitched, so it's going to stay down and stay nice and neat all the time this garment's being worn. Well done, there's your neckline.